this is my town and I don't...
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Maine to New York City and points west. From Middle East Eye, a Palestinian on an 80-day hunger strike to protest his arrest and imprisonment without any charge at all. He's been in prison since July.
أنا أحملهم المسؤولية الكاملة عن حياتي. أنا أرجو أن أعيش بين أطفالي وأن أعالج في المستشفيات الفلسطينية ولا أعالج هنا.
يغيب بين الحين والآخر، يدخل في غيبوبة، يعني وضعه الصحي في تدهور مستمر، حتى من ما يقارب 40 يوم لا يستطيع الحراك عن السرير بالمرة.
أنا أخبرت الأطباء إن حدثت معي غيبوبة وغبت عن الوعي ولم يوجد بجنبي مرافق أو أحد. أرجو أن لا يقدموا لي أي علاج ولا أي شيء، وأحملهم المسؤولية الكاملة عن أي ضرر في جسمي أو في حياتي في حال فعلوا في أي شيء أثناء غيبوبتي.
Please call for an end to the administrative detention of Maher al-Akhras. By the way, when the British ran Palestine, Zionist leaders bitterly complained about administrative detention. But once they took over, they used it freely without any problems of conscience. Home demolitions. Many times we've shown Israelis bulldozing Palestinian houses because of their supposed crime of being unable to get a housing permit from apartheid authorities. Though we can't do much about it, we can at least be witnesses. The following video is from the Israeli group B'Tselem. Iran has been in the news lately because of Trump's successful strong-arm efforts to get international banks to refuse to have anything to do with Iranian banks, thus crippling Iran's international trade. The main reason Trump is doing this is to please his Saudi and Israeli friends. It has nothing to do with any U.S. security interest. We remember the murderous sanctions against Iraq in the 90s, and we tremble. On the other hand, the Iranian regime is rather bestial, first towards Syrians by supporting the Assad regime, and internally against, as they say, its own people. Navid Afkari was recently executed after being convicted of murder of a security guard after a confession which he said was extracted under torture. Amnesty International said the case was a travesty of justice. Iran has the highest execution rate in the world. A few days ago, a number of us saw a new film about Nasrin, the Iranian lawyer who received a grotesque 38-year sentence for her legal work, mainly defending women's rights. That same day, the New York Times had an editorial pleading with the Trump administration to show some mercy with Iran, which is suffering mightily under the COVID plague. It noted that George W. Bush lessened some strictures against Iran when it had problems years ago. To our surprise, the editorial mentioned Nasrin and this very film. More about the film at nasrinfilm.com. In the first presidential debate of 2020, Trump was asked to denounce white supremacy. He brought up the Proud Boys and said, "Stand back and stand by." We're going to talk about the Proud Boys for a bit. This group attempted to have a rally in 2017 in New Haven. We'll show our coverage then of what happened. In New Haven, Connecticut, an alt-right group called the Proud Boys announced they were going to have a rally. They were met with a hot reception. Two groups from the so-called Proud Boys, about 3 or 4 persons each, showed up, and the crowd surrounded one group and angrily protested. The protest was made up of a large number of organizations and just individuals who wanted to take a stand against racism and the weak men who despise and hurt women. Okay, Natalie, there's people behind you, and they're gathering and they're writing signs. What's going on?
We are hosting a counter-protest today. Some alt-right and white supremacist groups around Connecticut have invited Augustus Invictus, who is a fascist libertarian former Senate candidate out of Florida, to come speak. Most of his rallies, all of his rallies have involved a lot of hate speech and a lot of overt white supremacy, and we're not going to let this stand here on the town square of New Haven, on the Green.
And how is it being organized? On Facebook or some group from town?
The counter-protest has been done person to person, individually. We've sent out some last-minute email calls, but the idea here was to make sure that they didn't know that there was going to be a counter-protest organized, and so we didn't want to go public with that. We don't want to feed the trolls. We don't want them to have a reason to get defensive already and to kind of pre-escalate. Several of the groups involved in this protest are overtly violent in their missions and in their kind of endeavors and how they move through the world, and so we want to make sure that we're not that we're being very, very tactical in our approach.
You mentioned hate speech. Who do they hate?
They hate people of color. They hate Muslims, especially. They hate queer folks. They hate women. The speaker who is coming up, Augustus Invictus, was charged in Florida with domestic abuse and battery and sexual assault for shutting his girlfriend in a closet and beating her, I believe, with a gun until she blacked out. These are not good actors.
And so what, if they're having a speaking event here on the Green, what do you all intend to do?
I think we're going to do our damnedest to make sure that they don't get a recruitment video out of this. So our tactics are designed to keep our people safe from them and from police harm, and to deny them the opportunity to get a good piece of audio or a good piece of video that doesn't there's a lot of humiliation planned. A lot of this stuff stems from toxic masculinity and from like wounded whiteness. And
Black and Pink is an organization that supports LGBTQ people in prison across the country. So I'm here today all fabulous because the organizations who are coming today are full of misogynist men who really have this warped 1950s view of gender, and they're really insecure about their masculinity. And I just want to be there and say, like, y'all are cowards and I'm empowered. I'm a queer and transgender man, and I have no problem being covered in glitter. It doesn't affect my opinion of my gender at all.
Fascist scum is really shitty! Get your ass out of our city! Anybody's body needs to be censored. I have a censor now. The people united will never be defeated! The people united will never be defeated! No fascist USA! No fascist USA!
Things did get a bit ugly. A paint balloon and silly string were thrown. A photo in a local paper appears to show a woman kicking a Proud Boy in the behind. There were 4 arrests of protesters, including one of longtime community activist Barbara Fair.
This is my town, and I don't
peace, man. We still need peace, people. We still need peace. We still need peace. Out of here.
After the rally, there were arguments among the protesters about how things went. A statement was issued by Dragonfly Climate Collective and the Connecticut IWW, which included these lines. But let's be clear about this as well. When they try to occupy space on the Green, we state unequivocally that sending fascists packing is an act of community self-defense. Fascism means gangs of white men attacking anti-racist demonstrators like in Portland, Oregon, or Berkeley, California. That was from that statement. That's one point of view, but on the other hand, there are questions of law and tactics. The community does have the right to be defended from fascist mobilization, but the police were all around, and some actions can get a lot of people into trouble. News about Syria. Victims and relatives of victims going to court to try to sue the Assad killers for the chemical attacks. The U.S. has been involved in at least 8 wars since 2001. There are sometimes estimates made of the number of dead, but David Vine on Democracy Now! Talked about a different number, the number of people displaced from their homes by these wars. The number is astounding.
We wanted to look specifically at how many people had been displaced by these wars. Basically, we found that no one had bothered to investigate how many people had been displaced by the wars in what are now actually at least 24 countries that the United States has been involved in. And we found that in total, at least 37 million people have been displaced in just 8 of the most violent wars that the United States has either launched or participated in since 2001. That's Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Syria, and the Philippines. And that's a very conservative estimate. We found that the actual total could be up to 48 to 59 million. And I do think we have to pause on these numbers because we, in many ways, our lives are drowning in numbers about COVID, about many things that are important to track quantitatively, but to wrap one's mind around what just 37 million people displaced is difficult, in fact, and I think it requires some active effort. It certainly did for me. 37 million, to put it in historical perspective, that's more people displaced by any war since at least the beginning of the 20th century, with the exception of World War II. The United States currently has about 800 military bases in around 80 foreign countries and territories. And this is more bases than any nation in world history. The United States has, as you alluded to, had even larger numbers of bases. At the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were upwards of 2,000 bases abroad. And part of what my book, The United States of War, shows is that this is also a long-term pattern. The United States has been building military bases abroad since independence, initially on the lands of Native American peoples, and then increasingly outside of North America, and eventually encircling the globe, particularly after World War II. And what I show is that these bases have not only enabled war, they've not only made war possible, but they've actually made more likely. It's made war a far too easy policy decision for powerful decision makers, leaders, politicians, corporate leaders, and others. And we need to basically dismantle this infrastructure of war that the United States has built up. Why does the United States have dozens of military bases in the Middle East, in virtually every country outside of Yemen and Iran? These bases, of course, are in countries that are led by undemocratic regimes, not spreading democracy, far from it, in many cases actually blocking the spread of democracy and making these wars possible. That I think it's important to underline again, beyond displacing 37 million people at least, and perhaps up to 59 million people, these wars have taken the lives of, as the Cost of War Project has shown, around 800,000 people. And this is just in 5 of the wars: Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen. The United States U.S. combat has taken the lives of around 800,000 people. But there are also indirect deaths that have been caused by the destruction of local infrastructure, healthcare services, hospitals, food sources. And those total deaths could number upwards of 3 million people. And I think most people in the United States, again, myself included, have not really reckoned with the total damage that these wars have caused. And we haven't even begun to wrap our minds around what it would mean to have this level of destruction in our lives.
And you have, for example, the effects of soldiers on bases, like what happened in the Philippines, where the authoritarian leader, President Duterte, just pardoned a U.S. soldier who was found guilty of murdering a trans woman off a base.
Yes, this is another cost of war. We need to look at the costs of war in terms of the human costs, in terms of direct combat deaths, injuries in these wars, the wars on terror, numbering in the tens of millions. But we also need to look at the deaths and injuries that are caused on a daily basis around U.S. military bases around the world. These bases have, in addition to enabling the wars that the United States has been fighting, they have very immediate harms that they inflict on local populations, including in the Philippines and in, as I said, around 80 countries and territories around the world.
Now, with millions losing the health insurance their employer formerly had paid for, we look back at a rally in front of Congresswoman DeLauro's office in New Haven, calling for Medicare for all.
Fight, fight, healthcare is a human right. 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 Connecticut has one of the best health exchanges in the country, right? I mean, that's what all of our House reps and senators say. Well, unlike them, I actually have Obamacare. I've been on the exchange since the beginning. In 3 years, I've watched half our providers leave the exchange, and my premiums jump 30% in 3 years. My husband and I pay over $1,000 a month in premiums. That does not include our deductibles. That doesn't include our copays. Next year, our premiums are projected to jump between 17 and 34% on the exchange. Turning page. A majority of House Democrats right now admit that the ACA is unaffordable and unsustainable. They have co-sponsored John Conyers' Medicare for All bill in the House. Red states like Georgia, Texas, the Carolinas, freaking Mississippi, they've all have reps on board. Only 78 House Democrats haven't signed the bill. Of those missing signatures, Connecticut is 5 for 5. If you've been to a town hall meeting lately, you know one of the first questions asked. It's, will you sign HR 676 Medicare for All? Their responses have been a mixed bag of badly tested talking points like, we're playing defense, or it can't pass. Apparently they haven't been reading the polls. Medicare for All now enjoys 85% approval among Democrats and left-leaning independents, and 60% approval among all voters. That's astounding. Hold on. So what puts Connecticut to the right of red states on healthcare? It's actually really, really simple. We're the insurance capital of the world, or at least we are before Edna leaves. The healthcare industry has donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to our reps to keep their names off bills like these.
That's our program for today. Stay safe, folks, but stay active. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.